When I was 16, my friend Lexi and I were trying to get super fit one summer. So we made a pact that we were going to swim around this one rock every day that summer. The swim wasn't that long, it only took like 15 minutes. But the rule was that you had to swim around the backside of the rock. You couldn't just go out and back. You had to go behind it. And the backside of the rock was always a little scary because once you got behind the rock, no one on the beach could see you anymore. So if anything happened to you, you'd be on your own. But we were ridiculously intense about it. Like we went turbo beast mode. We said that no matter the weather, no matter the size of the waves, the strength of the rip current, we would swim around the rock for the entire month of July every day. And we were super serious about this commitment. Like one day, Lexi ate a really bad pepperoni calzone and had the worst food poisoning. And she was literally shitting her pants. And I was like, Lexi, you don't have to swim with me today. And she still swam with me that day. But then one day, in the middle of July 16th actually to be exact, because I remember, we were swimming around the rock and something bad happened. So Lexi and I are swimming and we're like halfway through the swim on the backside of the rock. And while we're swimming, something hits me on the back. It literally felt like someone punched me underwater. And I scream and Lexi's like, what happened? But I was freaked out and I didn't explain it to her. So I just told her to swim to the rock, get out of the ocean and get on top of it. Once we were safe on the rock, I told Lexi what had happened and she was super freaked out. And I actually had a red mark on my back. So she knew I wasn't making any of it up. We stayed on the rock staring at the water, trying to spot anything moving for like 30 minutes. But after a while, we were like, okay, well, we have to swim back at some point. So we decided to swim in. We literally swam as fast as we could back to the shore. When we got to the shore, there was an old woman on the beach looking at us kind of weirdly. She's like, where's your other friend? And we were confused. We were like, what? She's like, you had a third girl swimming with you, didn't you? And we were like, no, it's just us. And she's like, well, I definitely saw a third girl out there with you guys. But then, a few days later, the local newspaper came out with a story titled Something in the Water. People at another beach a few miles away claimed that they were getting hit by So people were claiming at this other beach in town that something was hitting them in the water. And they couldn't see what it was, but a few people had described the same sensation. The feeling of a really hard, blunt kind of punch in the water. So Lexi and I start to suspect that whatever's hitting people at that beach also hit me a few days earlier. And even though it was only July 19th, Lexi and I decided that it wasn't safe to swim behind the rock anymore. But I still would obviously go to the beach, and my favorite time to go was early in the mornings. And usually it would just be me at the beach at that time of day, but one morning I came down and the same old lady that thought that there had been a third girl swimming with us that one afternoon was standing there on the shore of the beach. She was just standing there with her feet in the water, but when I walked by, she turned around and she goes, "It must be a beautiful life out there. I bet they're happy." And then she bent down and picked something up from the sand and handed it to me. It was a type of shell that I had seen all the time. And she goes, "Do you know what these are? These are mermaid nails. We must have one living nearby this summer." And then she winks. A few nights later, I was at the beach again at a beach fire. And that's when I made a huge mistake. I bet they're happy. And then she bent down and picked something up from the sand and handed it to me. It was a type of shell that I had seen all the time. And she goes, "Do you know what these are? These are mermaid nails. We must have one living nearby this summer." And then she winks. A few nights later, I was at the beach again at a beach fire. And that's when I made a huge mistake. So a few nights later, we were having a beach fire and it was really fun. Everyone was drinking. It was getting pretty rowdy. I was a couple of beers deep. And then one of my friends proposes that we play truth or dare. So we're going around and of course I'm feeling tipsy and therefore bold. So when it's my turn, I choose dare. And this guy, Eddie, who was a few years older than me, dared me to go climb up one of the big rocks, jump off into the ocean and swim all the way in. But since hearing about this creature in the ocean, I hadn't gone in past my waist. But as I said, I was feeling drunk and brave. So I said fine. So I strip down ass naked and I start walking towards the rock and everyone's drunkenly cheering, but as I get further away, their cheers become quieter and soon it's just me and the wind and the sound of the ocean. And I'm starting to get cold because even that something hit me in the back. But I close my eyes and I just jump in and the water actually feels warmer than the air and it feels good and I'm happy I'm in it. And I see kind of the small orange yellow light of the campfire on shore and I start swimming towards it. But then I hear a small splash behind me. Like it sounded like a small fish jumped out of the water. But I can't really see anything because the moon was just a sliver that night and everything around me was pitch black. But I start swimming faster towards shore. And all of a sudden I feel something take my hand. Like grab it really aggressively. It feels like another hand holding mine trying to pull me down. And I freak out and I scream and I pull my hand away and I start swimming faster than I ever have in my whole life. And then I feel the same thing grab my ankle and I kick and it's still holding on to it, but finally I kick really hard and I get it to let go and I'm swimming even faster. And honestly, I kind of blacked out, but once I got to the point where I could touch, I just start sprinting through the water onto the shore. So I sprint back to the fire and I'm trying to tell my drunk friends what had happened, but they think I'm trying to trick them and scare them and that I made up this scare. They're all like, haha, nice, I can't believe you actually got in the water. So later that night, I'm getting into bed and I'm thinking, did all of that actually happen or did I just imagine it? Like, it just seemed so surreal. So in the summer, I like to wear a lot of anklets because I think they look really cute on like tan, bare feet. So I had a lot of anklets that summer, like rope braided anklets. So the next morning, I'm in bed and I feel something sharp against my ankle. So I pull my foot out from under the covers and I look, and stuck in one of my anklets is a shell. And I look a little closer and it's the same shell that the old lady showed me on the beach, a mermaid's nail. So there's this lighthouse that you can see from my house, and my mom used to tell me a story about a woman who used to live there. No one lives in it now, but there used to be this young woman in her 20s who lived there like 30 years ago. Apparently she came from a really broken home. Her mom and sister died in a horrible car crash, and her dad was an abusive drug addict. So the harbor master let her live in the lighthouse and paid her a small salary for taking care of it. So she had been living there for a couple months, and that's when she noticed weird things starting to happen. Some of her belongings would occasionally go missing. Like one time she couldn't find her flashlight and she looked for it everywhere. And finally she found it under her bed, which was weird because she knew she had never put it there. But then weirder stuff started to happen. So at this point, she had been living at the lighthouse for like 6 months, and she was getting pretty creeped out because bizarre things started happening. She started noticing that some of her food was going missing, but she was the only person who lived in the lighthouse, obviously, and she was really specific about what food she bought when she went grocery shopping. She went to the grocery store at the beginning of each week, and for example, she would always buy 7 apples, one for each day of the week. And she was always really precise about that. But there were a few Sundays where she didn't have any apples left by the end of the week, which didn't make any sense because she always counted at the grocery store to make sure she had 7 apples. So she started getting more and more creeped out, but she didn't want to say anything because she had nowhere else to live. And then one night, she woke up in the middle of the night to something touching her feet. So she woke up in the middle of the night to something tickling her feet, and she was really freaked out, obviously. So she jumped out of bed and turned all the lights in the lighthouse on. But when the lights came on, there was nothing there. She checked through the whole lighthouse and couldn't find anything. Nothing like that ever happened again, but she never slept well after that. She stayed in the lighthouse for like 5 more months, but eventually she found a new place to live, got a new job. She ended up moving to an entirely different state. And then one day, like a year later, she's at work, sitting at her desk, and she's going through old pictures on her phone. And she finds an album on her phone called You at Night. And she's thinking, what? I do not remember making this album. So she clicks into it and she gasps because all the pictures in the album are of her sleeping in her old bed. In high school, I had a friend who lived in this old, small apartment building. And on the first floor was this old guy named Dave who had apparently lived in the building forever. And no one really knew what Dave's deal was. The only time people saw him is when he walked outside to walk his tiny dog. But other than that, he never left his apartment. He had a nephew who delivered him groceries once a week. My friend just assumed that Dave was too old or had some sort of sickness that prevented him from leaving the house. One day, my friend was coming home from school and Dave's nephew was leaving the apartment building. And my friend is really sweet, so she was like, hey, I know Dave sometimes has troubles getting out of the house, so if you ever need me to go over there and bring him something, let me know. I'm always happy to help. And the nephew looked really shocked and terrified. He was like, no, you should never go over to Dave's ever. And then he got really awkward and he was like, okay, gotta go, bye. And then a few weeks later, my friend was coming home from a Halloween party late at night. And when she got inside her apartment building, Dave's door on the first floor was wide open and it was pitch black inside his apartment. But then she heard something behind her. So my friend hears something behind her, but it's pitch black. She's like, hello? And then she finds the switch to the hallway lights, turns them on, and Dave is standing right there with his small dog. She's like, hey Dave, you kind of scared me. And Dave was like, oh, sorry, I was looking for the light switch myself. But that didn't make any sense because he wasn't standing anywhere close to the switch and he had been living in that apartment building for 30 years. So she starts walking up the stairs and then Dave says, I've been working on a project that I'm really excited to show you. And my friend's like, oh, like an art project? And Dave's like, yeah, kinda. And she's like, okay, well maybe my mom and I can come by another time to see it. And then they say goodnight, but she just feels pretty weird about the whole interaction. A few months later, she's at school and she gets a text from her mom that she has to work late and won't be home to make dinner. That afternoon, my friend walks home, walks up the stairs to her apartment building, goes to unlock the door, but then realizes the door's already unlocked. Sometimes her mom would forget to lock the door, so it wasn't totally out of the ordinary, but it was winter and it was already getting dark outside even though it was only 4 p.m. So she turns on all the lights to her apartment. But then, all of a sudden, all the lights switch off. She tries to switch all the lights back on, but they're not working anymore. And all of a sudden, she's finding it really hard to breathe. She's afraid she might faint, so she kneels down onto the floor. Then suddenly she feels sharp nails running down her back. And she tries to move, but she feels so weak that she can't. She turns around to see who it is, but before she can, she blacks out. The next thing she remembers is waking up in a hospital bed, and her mom is sitting next to her looking really worried. Her mom's like, everything's okay, there was a carbon monoxide leak in the apartment, and you passed out. The nurse is like, in the next few weeks you may feel tired or sluggish or have hallucinations. Don't worry, that's totally normal. And my friend is like, what about the back scratches? Her mom's like, what are you talking about? So she runs to the bathroom, pulls up her hospital gown, and there are 4 dark scratches on her back. When she comes back from the bathroom, her mom looks concerned and she goes, honey, there's also something else you should know. Dave, who lived on the first floor, passed away, and they've been cleaning out his apartment and they found something. And it might freak you out, but I feel like I was like, what are you talking about? So she runs to the bathroom, pulls up her hospital gown, and there are 4 dark scratches on her back. When she comes back from the bathroom, her mom looks concerned and she goes, honey, there's also something else you should know. Dave, who lived on the first floor, passed away, and they've been cleaning out his apartment and they found something. And it might freak you out, but I feel like you should know about it. Mom tells her that they found a weird box of things in his closet, and inside that box were random pictures of her, an old hairbrush, pieces of hair, a pair of shoes that she thought she had lost. And the nurses think that the scratches are from when she fainted, but she's sure she felt someone scratching her back, and she's sure that it was the ghost of Dave. When I was in 6th grade, I went to go visit my little cousins at their house. Their house was right on the edge of these woods, and the woods were really thick, and our parents always told us not to go there. And one time I asked my mom why, and she said because when people do bad things, they sometimes go and hide in the woods. I was staying at my cousin's house for a week on this one trip, and whenever I was bored, I would go look out the window and watch the woods. Usually it was pretty boring, and I would just be staring at trees, but one day it was like 5 p.m. and the sun was setting, so it was getting dark, and I saw something moving in the woods. I told my uncle, and he said it was probably just an animal, and I told him no, it was tall and looked like a skinny lady. And he said I have a creative imagination and it was probably just a deer. But then a few minutes later, I heard my aunt and uncle whispering in the kitchen. My aunt was talking about a woman from a psychiatric hospital in their town who had escaped. Their house was like 15 minutes away from a maximum security psychiatric hospital for criminals with mental illness. And then they saw me listening to them in the doorway and they stopped talking completely. A few days later, in the middle of the night, I heard a noise.